so make sure, so just make sure that that you basically check what each newspaper's guidelines are for their op-eds. Like some newspapers may say an op-ed of 750 words, some may say 1,200 words. So you'll want to make sure that you read those guidelines carefully for the newspaper that you're targeting, and then basically, want to stick to those guidelines. It's important to stick to the guidelines that the newspaper is asking for. Timing is important. If you're responding to a news event, you have to be really quick. You have to write the op-ed the same day. If something is in the news, if you want to maximize the chances of it getting published, you have to move quickly. Submit a complete op-ed. Generally, because so many op-eds come in, like newspapers will receive hundreds and thousands of op-eds each week. And so if you write to them, say, I have an idea about this, they generally won't respond. But if you submit it and they like it, then they will print it. Some op-eds are commissioned. Sometimes if you get to know a news organization, work with an editor regularly, they may ask you to write an op-ed about a specific topic. So that's something that might happen if you become a regular op-ed writer for a news outlet. And sometimes you may have an idea, and you may draft the op-ed ahead of time. And then when a particular news story comes along, you just sort of like make your first paragraph specific to the news story and then submit your op-ed. Op-eds can be written in many different styles. We'll cover that in a bit. And you can always share like charts or graphs or photographs to illustrate the story in your op-ed. Sometimes the illustration can be a story. Op-eds, do's and don'ts. So do write a reasoned op-ed, like it should be logical. You should state your argument, what you're making a case for, supported by examples. Keep the focus of your op-ed really narrow. If you try to talk about too many things, you will end up, being all over the place. And the best way to write an op-ed is to pick one aspect of a story that you want to tell and to focus on that aspect, and then give examples to support that aspect. You can give one example, you can give 3 examples, but after you may build your case and give all the examples, then circle back to the argument that you were making in the beginning, your one main assertion, and bring your conclusion full circle. Stick to the guidelines required by the newspaper and word limit required by the newspaper. Op-ed don'ts. Don't say anything you can't back up with evidence. So make sure that everything that you're writing can be backed up with evidence, and you'll want to share examples of those pieces of evidence. Don't rant or write an angry piece, because that likely won't get published. Don't make a sales pitch for something, because that likely won't get published either. A lot of newspapers also won't publish endorsements of political candidates. Don't repurpose something you've already published. Make sure it's original and new. Don't write too long. Op-eds are supposed to be between 700 to 1,000 words, and don't send it to more than one news outlet at a time. So before we move into op-ed styles, I'm going to circle back to the first original style, which we skipped over. But communications is basically both a science and an art. Op-eds are a powerful way of sharing a story. Storytelling, you'll hear a lot of communicators talk about that. And storytelling is all about creating that emotional connection with your readers. Decisions by people are made at a very emotional level, and all the logical reasons that we tell ourselves about why we did or did not make a decision is how we rationalize those emotional decisions that we make. And so your goal with any op-ed that you write should be to make that emotional connection with your readers. And so that's going to be critically important. And that's how you win hearts and minds. So circling back to different op-ed styles, you could write a personal vignette, which is basically share a personal story. That could be, I once wrote on Autism Awareness Day, I wrote an op-ed about my journey with autism, with my son being diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. And that got published and was very widely shared. Or you could write individual to community, for instance, make your personal case for the greater good. So once, I don't know if you remember this, but New Jersey's Attorney General Graval was being attacked by certain radio hosts, but they were making like discriminatory comments against him. And so, the Star Ledger, I was talking to them about something else, but they said, would you be willing to write an op-ed telling people what they can do in a situation like this? So at that point, like I made the personal case for greater good, and I talked about being inclusive of the Sikh and Muslim communities. And I drew a parallel between, Muslim women who wear the hijab and Sikhs who wear a turban for religious reasons, and talked about being empathetic and things you can do to help, how difficult that can be, but for people who are observing their faith, and basically made the case to people for why they should be empathetic and how they can be empathetic, right? In some ways in which they can demonstrate their support for people who are observing their faith in our communities. You could write news or analysis about something that's happening in the news. You could share your analysis on that. Or if there's a current news event, you could do a postmortem of it. So if you are doing a postmortem, like timing is key. So make sure that you submit it quickly, right, immediately after the event takes place. You could write about holidays and recurring events. And so one Ramadan, I wrote about, observing Ramadan and celebrating Eid, and explained to people what our traditions are. That op-ed got published. And then you can also write an op-ed about a news event informing an issue of longstanding concern. So, another time I wrote an op-ed about, so you can write op-eds about, something that's happening in Palestine that's a longstanding concern, and you could talk about, your stance on that and things that people can do about that. Major policy analysis, for instance, if you wanted to examine US policy on a particular issue or New Jersey's policy on a particular issue, you could write an op-ed about that. And then there's problem and solution. So that's another type of op-ed. So, recently, at the beginning of this year, in January, I co-wrote an op-ed on institutional and structural racism in Princeton, and how our Civil Rights Commission had put together a committee, which I served on, and we came together to address it by developing a toolkit to address institutional and structural racism. And so that op-ed got published as well. So with that, I'm going to share an example of an op-ed that I've written, just to share with you a concrete example of what an op-ed looks like. This is an op-ed that I wrote in 2019, when Trump was separating children and parents at the borders and placing them in detention centers. So I decided to, talk about that and share my personal story on that. So I said, the topic, the title was, and by the way, I always have a title, but oftentimes the newspaper will, put their own title on it. Sometimes they'll ask you if you're okay with it. Sometimes they won't. But if you don't like the title, you can always object to them and let them know that you'd like to change it. So the title, I had a different title, but the title they picked for me was, I'm a migrant, and I can tell you that no one makes the decision to leave their home, their country lightly. So I'm gonna just exit out of this screen. And okay, and I'm going to share my screen again. So this got published in the Star Ledger. So again, the title is, I'm a migrant, and I can tell you that no one makes the decision to leave their home, their country lightly. And and I'm going to read this out to you. It's very short. It shouldn't take too much time, but there's a particular reason why I shared this, and I'll explain that to you at the end. So although I rarely ever talk about it, the inhumane treatment of migrant refugees at our border compels me to share my personal story. I had spent most of my childhood in Kuwait, and while I'm originally from Pakistan, Kuwait was really the only home I ever knew since I had grown up there. In August of 1990, we had just gotten back from summer vacation in Pakistan when Saddam Hussein suddenly attacked Kuwait. Kuwait went from being a safe and comfortable home to a very scary place to be in, with Iraqi soldiers everywhere and the firing of guns every night to keep the residents in check. My parents decided that we should leave for Pakistan, and since the airport was shut down due to the invasion, we knew we would have to make the long drive there by car. Thus, my parents started reaching out to their friends to create a caravan to travel together, as they believed that there was safety in numbers. They put the caravan together based on skill set so that there was a doctor and a car mechanic in the group in case anything happened along the road. My parents went through this exercise twice, but unfortunately, when it was time to travel, for some reason or the other, we could not leave with the caravan as planned. Thus, despite my parents' best planning, we set out on the long journey from Kuwait through Iraq, Turkey, Iran, and finally to Pakistan alone. We were very cognizant of the dangers of the mostly deserted roads, and my parents were no doubt very concerned about the safety and well-being of their 4 children. However, they knew that the situation in Kuwait was deteriorating quickly, and so it was not safe to stay there either. Although we had grown up traveling all over the world, the 2-week drive to Pakistan was the scariest journey of our lives. Thankfully, the journey was, for the most part, uneventful despite a few bumps along the road, and we were relieved to make it to the Pakistan border, where we finally felt safe. I bring this up now because I keep hearing people talking about how these migrant families brought the predicament that they're upon themselves, and that they endangered the lives of their children by making a dangerous journey to the United States, and thus deserve the inhumane conditions that they're being subjected to now. Believe me when I say that no one makes the decision to make such a journey lightly, and that it is desperation and fear that compels families to take on the unknown dangers of the road. Many of these families are fleeing violence or terrible circumstances in their own countries. They should be treated with dignity and humanity at our borders and be allowed to go through the asylum process. These migrant families felt forced by their circumstances in their countries to come to the United States to seek a better life, and instead they're faced with unspeakable horrors, losing their children and parents, and children being forced into overcrowded, unhygienic cages with the lack of adequate food and water, and being denied the basic hygiene supplies that are necessary. They're also being denied access to adequate healthcare. This breeding ground for disease are precisely the circumstances that led to many deaths in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Anne Frank died of typhus due to the unsanitary conditions in the camps. I can't begin to imagine the trauma that these parents and children must be experiencing, the devastating effects of which will last a lifetime. The great irony here is that this is happening during our lifetime in the United States of America, a country which has been a beacon of human rights and dignity. As an American citizen who has always been proud of our leadership in the human rights arena, the inhumane treatment of migrant families at our border is too much to bear. We can't allow this to go on. I don't believe for a minute that we as United States citizens are powerless to do anything about this. This is an issue for every mother, father, child, grandfather, grandmother, every caring citizen to take on. And it is important that all of our elected officials do everything in their power to make it known that we care and will not allow concentration camps in the United States of America. Join me today to call on all of our elected officials, even if they're Democrats, to represent our voices by letting it be known that we want to shut down these camps, reunify these migrant families, and allow these families to go through the proper asylum process at our borders. Democrats in Congress recently did not do enough to provide oversight for better standards of care over the recent aid package given to alleviate the conditions at detention centers. We are not helpless or powerless. We can and must take action. Afshin Shamsi lives in Princeton. So that is an op-ed that I wrote. And I shared this for a very particular reason. Who I want to ask you, and I want to engage you, and I want to ask you very quickly, who am I writing about? Whose policies am I writing about? Anyone? You're muted.
I think your target was all the way the federal government to the people who are implementing the border, the immigration people. Or the,
You're absolutely right. So I'm writing about Trump's policies, right? And it was his policy to separate the migrant families. And so I just want to walk you through this op-ed one more time very quickly. And I want to just share with you that nowhere in this story do I ever mention Trump by name. That was not intentional on my part. I only realized it afterwards. But I'm sharing that with you because the story is not centered on Trump. It's centered on the suffering and the trauma of these migrant families. While I'm writing about Trump's inhumane policies, I'm keeping it, I'm keeping the story focused on the families on the border and their predicament.
But I think you already hooked your reader with your personal story, and they were willing to hear your second part. And I think that's very crucial, was to bring instead of attacking the problem directly, your wisdom took you to tell your personal story. And I think that was very crucial.
Yes, exactly. You draw your reader in by sharing your personal story. That's a great observation, by the way. So that's a great way to draw people into a policy problem that you might want to address. So start by sharing your personal story and then talk about the policy. And then, I specifically share this one because Trump is the oppressor, but I don't mention him by name even once. And so as you're thinking about sharing your Palestinian story, centered around the experience of Palestinians or Palestinian Americans. And you can talk about Israel, but don't make the mistake of making the story about Israel. Focus on your Palestinian story. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And then let me go back to sharing the presentation.
Will you email it to us?
Yes, you'll have a copy of the presentation afterwards. I'm going to share it with Abir, and Abir can share it with all the attendees.
Because
So,
I want
I'll share it with
I want to email it to other people.
Yeah, of course. And I'm happy to do this workshop again, by the way, and also to answer any questions you may have after the workshop. I'll share my email address. It's in the presentation. I put it there. Okay. So. Okay, so now the op-ed worksheet. So this is the part where I want you to pull out your pen, paper, your pencil paper, or a document on your Google Drive or a Word doc that you want to write in. And now we're going to walk through how you can write an op-ed. So I will tell you that this is when I first started writing op-eds, this is how I was writing them. I would create an outline and then write the op-ed once I had created the outline. But I can tell you, after you've written your first few op-eds, like maybe 3 or 4, you won't always need to do this. In the beginning, it just helps you organize your thoughts. But then as you become a pro, you'll just be able to write them organically. So the very first part is writing down your idea. So write your idea down as nut graphs. A nut graph is 3 or 4 sentences explaining each of your ideas written in a way that would entice a reader to keep reading. What was, what's new, and what's now. So take a moment to write down your idea for what you'd like to write an op-ed about. 3 or 4 sentences, and then we'll go around and share all of our ideas with each other. So your idea could be anything from sharing, a historical event, a current event, a policy, telling the history of a place, sharing a cultural aspect, sharing a religious aspect of your Palestinian American story, or sharing a personal story of your own experience as a Palestinian or as a Palestinian American, an op-ed about policy. It could be any one of those things or something else entirely. And so take a few moments to jot down, 3 or 4 sentences explaining just your idea for what you'd like to write an op-ed about. Okay, are we good, or do you need some more time? Okay, good. The next, I'd like you to state in a bullet point the issue you're addressing. So it can be just one bullet point. Here's the issue I'm trying to address, whether it's migration, whether it's human rights, whether it's policy, whether this is the thing you're going to build your case around, the argument that you're going to be making. So what is the problem? Stating the problem. Whether it's oppression, whether it's something else. And then I'd like you to list at least one or possibly as many as 3 examples of how that problem is realized, how the issue is realized, how it happens on the ground. An example of the problem, at least one, or you could list 3. In just a couple of bullet points. And then it's not just enough to present the problem, you have to have a solution as well. So take 1 bullet point or 2 bullet points or 3 bullet points to jot down your proposed solution to this problem. Are we good? Do you need some more time? Okay, so then the final and the most important piece, a call to action. You always want to close by a call to action. Now, there's 2 types of actions that you could propose. There's the big A or the little a. The big A is the big action, is the big policy change that you might want to see happen, right? But that could take years, that could take months, that could take years. And that'll take like 100 things or 50 things to happen in order for that big policy change to happen. But the little a is an action that your readers can do immediately as a first step in getting that big A to happen, the big policy shift to happen. So always for your op-eds, while you're advocating for some big policy change, the big A, the big action that you want to have happen, always think about the little a. What is a step that your readers can take, the little action your readers can take today to help you get closer as a first step to the big A, the big action you want to see happen. And that is the call to action. You always close with the call to action. You ask your readers to do something, you energize them, you mobilize them, you ask them to take some action. So think about what that little a could be. What can you ask your readers to do today that'll help you as a first step to get closer to the big change that you want to see. And then finally, your credentials as a writer. I can write about this because I'm a Palestinian American, and you might want to share a little bit about yourself. I just simply share my credentials as Afshin Shamsi lives in Princeton, because now the editor knows me really well. I've been writing op-eds for quite a few years, and I have a relationship with her, but in the beginning when I was writing, I had to share my credentials. And so I would always share, that I'm a former Princeton school board member, and that I serve on the board of the ACLU in New Jersey. And I would modify that based on what I'm writing about. So if I'm writing about something political, I would share my political credentials. If I'm writing about education, I'd share my school board member credentials. If I'm writing about a civil rights issue, I would write, as an ACLU New Jersey board member. But also, if you're on the board of an organization, you either have to get the organization's permission to be able to write in your capacity as a board member of that organization, or you can just mention that you're a board member, but that you're writing this op-ed in your personal capacity. So that is something that I've done as well. That last year I wrote an op-ed about the 2020 presidential election, and I said, I'm co-chair of New Jersey Muslims for Biden. I'm part of Muslim Women for Biden and Muslims for Biden, but I'm writing this in my personal capacity, and so that's important. With that, we're going to go around and just hear from all of you on your ideas. So would love to hear what you'd like to write about. Any volunteers to go first?
What about Alia?
Alia, you've been volunteered.
Alia, are you with us?
Yes, yes.
Why don't you go first? Are you driving?
No, I'm not. I'm just, I have my headphones on and I'm kind of have a cold. So that's probably, I sound kind of weird, but.
You sound great. You sound great.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I don't know how to express what I would like to write about, because it might not, it might not be something that you want to hear. So I'm just trying to figure out a way how to express, I think from my life journey, and recent events and everything that was going on, and I just realized, and I came to the conclusion that is that the situation, basically to fix this situation has to happen from my point of view, is that as long as we continue, we are oppressed, certainly, so many issues people are oppressed with, but I realized that if we continue to look at ourselves as oppressed, then we're going to keep re-traumatizing ourselves over and over and over again. Because when we look at ourselves as victims, we operate at a level that puts us in a way very vulnerable to trauma. And unfortunately, because we're so traumatized, it's like, it's kind of like we have to heal our traumas and look at ourselves in a different way. I guess that's why I kind of like if I want to write something, if I want to write my opinion about what's going on and what I hear so many people going through as Palestinians or any other oppressed people, I realize that the work has to come from us first. We have to work on ourselves, heal ourselves, look at ourselves, and figure out what we're doing wrong and be honest about that, brutally honest, and fix that. There's no other way out of this. And not look at the external environment, because if the internal environment is not right, the external environment is going to be unright. If the internal environment is right, then the external environment is going to change in our favor. So this is what I see. And unfortunately, it hurts my heart to see, because I was like, now probably I've been around, like when I see like the Palestinian youth and how they still in this re-traumatization, I just feel sad, because that's not going to be a solution. So the solution has to happen from us, and not look outside, and stop looking at ourselves as victims, but as people who want to heal and thrive. That's what I want to say.
Okay, so it sounds like the issue that you want to address is, or the problem you want to address is, it's a reflective piece. So the problem that you want to address is the traumatization of Palestinians and Palestinian Americans, and addressing that, healing ourselves, but looking at us internally to see what we can do differently instead of focusing so much on the external. And so I would suggest like putting that down, creating an outline, and then presenting the solution, and then making a call to action about what people can do today to move them in the direction that you want to move them in.
Yeah. Here where I like to examine what I just heard. I like everything that Alia said, but I like her to say that in her own community, in her own mosque, in her own church, and so forth, because that's, your audience is not the public audience. Your audience is your own people that you want them to think differently. Now, an op-ed for the public opinion, that's a different dynamics. I need that public, the public and political figures to know my story and help me to resolve that. But your story, in this case, Alia, it's more of a, you are speaking to your own people. Does that make sense? Not to the public audience.
So
did I understand? Because you are talking to Palestinian, unless we critique ourselves, heal ourselves, and examine where we are, will never be effective outside. So you are talking to your own audience,
Yes.
not to the public. Does that make sense?
Yes, and actually this is what's happening, is that we never really examined ourselves in a very brutal, honest way to realize that we are, our state right now, as the way we're functioning, is really, we know it. We know that it's actually very sad, tragic. It's like I don't know how to express it. And I think you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and Alia, I really plugged where you are, because as I was walking in the mall and I looked at this text, and made me so angry, because the report was that about Abbas, that he is corrupt like every other Arab ruler. So we are not better off. I thought, we can critique ourselves, we can change, but that text made me so furious. If we are corrupt like hell, like every other leader, we'll never advance.
So thank you. Fahad, you raise a great point, which is like, who is your audience, right?
Correct.
And
I think.
And so you have to find the right venue for this, right? If you wanted to share this, one way to do it is the way that Fahad is suggesting, which is by going to your mosque, by going to PAC, by going to other venues where Palestinian American community members are.
The Palestinian American community, yeah.
Yeah, and sharing it to them. The other thing is, if you wanted to write an op-ed, you could find a Palestinian American newspaper that only goes to Palestinian Americans,
yeah.
or you could find a newspaper in Palestine and submit your op-ed for consideration there as well, right? So it's important to find the right news outlet. Like some stories maybe have a national focus. And so if they have a national focus, you can submit it to a national newspaper. Some stories may have a very local focus. So you want to think about a local paper to submit it to. So always think about who your audience is and which is the right news outlet to publish that in. So thank you, Fahad, for raising that important point. And then Fahad, you're up.
And Abir already answered her question, saying that the Palestinian American community have a magazine, and Alia can write her article there. So
Excellent.
you already have an audience, yeah.
To tell you the truth, from what I see from, like, I've never tried to write actually, but what I heard is that those voices who try to write these things are often attacked, even in our community, and they're not really listened to. Like there's that's why I'm saying, like, our situation is really not right. We're not really listening to the right voices. We're not giving them chance to speak. Like when they want to start to speak, they're just cut off.
So Alia, I would suggest write the op-ed and send it to Abir and see what happens next. So that's one step, and we only have 10 more minutes left before this workshop comes to an end. So I want to give Fahad the opportunity to share his idea.
I really, while I'm hearing, I really changed what I want. I wanted originally to talk about the Nakba experience, but while I was thinking, I changed. I wanted to not only think about what happened during the Nakba, but basically the Nakba is a continuous story. So in my case, that in 1948, basically we were 8 children, 5 sisters and 3 brothers, and we were leaving home. And the thing that really consumed me was we are leaving home, and I can see myself running around Dad, 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and my mother was not there. And as a 4-year-old kid, you are close to mother. So suddenly I saw her, she was on the top of the roof waving, and we went up to the next village. We were there several months. We came back, and 4 Palestinian villages were destroyed. And as a teenager, I always wanted to know why my mother did not go with us. And I discovered that she was very strong, and she said to Dad, you take the children, you can protect them. This is our home, this is our land, this is our church. I'm not going to leave. So I to me, she was an incredible person that really, she was not willing to leave, but she wanted to click to our home, to our land, and so forth. So basically, 4 Palestinian villages were destroyed, and one of them is the famous Mahmoud Darwish destroyed, and so forth. So some of us, the old timers, think that is one event. So I wanted to change the op-ed and say that what happened in North of 1948 happened in the 50s, in the 60s, 67, continue happening. And because, you know, the goal of uh, uh, Zionism, I want the land, I don't want the people. And so I needed to link that idea with Sheikh Jarrah, because basically Sheikh Jarrah, the suburb of Jerusalem, imagine way in the 50s, the United Nations and the government of Jordan gave this housing to these people who are refugees from Jaffa and Haifa. And now uh, uh, they want to kick them. In fact, the famous young man and woman, El Kurd, they already took half of their house with settlers. So the the uh, the thing that I'm learning from you, we really need to focus on one idea and work on it and educate our audience, because uh, I was speaking to a highly educated group uh, in a church, about 60 people. And the moment I said from the river, the Jordan River to the sea, we are 50% of the population. He said, that's the only thing I heard from you. Everything, every other things I couldn't hear, because all my life I thought the Palestinian is only 10 to 15%. But when you said that between the river to the sea, you are 50% of the population today, not including the people outside, that, that was an intellectual and cultural shock. And I want you to start with that point, because people don't have the vaguest idea about the Palestinian population. I mean, we have been eliminated in the psyche of the American people through education, through media, through history, that we don't exist. I mean, 50% of the population, you know, his answer was, you know, you can deal with 5, with 10, and don't give attention to 15, 20. But when you tell me 50%, he said it's a different ballgame. And Americans do not know the basics of Palestinian story.
That's really powerful, and you know, that is exactly the purpose of this workshop, to help share the Palestinian story, because we don't see that in the media, right? We see everything else in the media, but we don't see the Palestinian story. We don't see the Palestinian narrative. And an op-ed is a powerful way to share the Palestinian story through personal experience in the media. And so one thing that I'd like you to think about as you're thinking, I think that's really powerful. Start out by talking about your personal story, your mother, and then tying it to what's happening today. As you get towards the end, like, think about what solution you're calling for, right, and what action, what is the little a, the small action you can ask your readers to take today. Like, is there a petition they can sign? Is to stop the forced expulsion of people from their homes in Palestine? Is there something else they can do? Like, think about what could be that small action that you can close with asking people to take, because you want to inspire and energize and mobilize people to take some kind of action, right? Correct. And so share your powerful stories, and then remember to always spur people to action and ask them to do something. So with that,
I wanted to add one more item, that you know, after college and after seminary, when I was invited to speak in churches, I will do excellent homework with statistics, with history, and so forth. And then suddenly, about 25 years ago, when I start telling my story, a lot of people said, your story was more moving than all the statistics that you were talking about. Yeah. So I need to really, Afshin, to enforce your focus on stories. I think at this point in history, stories can affect and make a change more than just basic statistics.
Yeah, absolutely. That is.
Can I say something? I'm sorry for Fahad. I
Yes.
just wanted to say that hearing you talk about your trauma and the Nakba since 1948, for me, that trauma, as you said, is that I'm actually now studying trauma and how to heal it. So when I realized that now there's like a huge um, and what you realize even in epigenetics and generational trauma, it's actually transmitted through genetics. Like even if like your grandson wasn't there, he is going to hold that trauma. It's going to be in his genes. So, and the way we are dealing with this trauma, and like our nervous system and our brains get shocked into a way of dealing with things that is not helpful to our well-being and the way we think about things. So this trauma is embedded in us, as I said. So it's an ongoing nakba, and as long as we don't really realize that and wake up and figure out a way how to see this and heal it in our generations, and look at ourselves and what we have done wrong through history and what our situation is right now. As I said, this is so important what you're saying right now, because as for example, my story, your story, like if I'm going to talk about like my family story, for example, for me now, all Palestinian stories are all gonna focus on one thing, like the sadness, the tragedy, and all the things that happened. But all that, like we can get the sympathy from the outside, but as long as we don't really work on ourselves and wake up and figure out how to heal ourselves and move forward from traumatization to healing and thriving and looking at ourselves really seriously with the eyes of honesty, nothing is gonna change. Because
Yeah, thank you so much for that stirring call to heal ourselves. We've got 30 seconds left of the workshop. And this is a huge topic that you're raising, and I don't think we'll solve it today, but thank you for raising it. And I encourage you to write about it and talk to the Palestinian American people by sharing your thoughts and ideas and your personal journey. So I just want to close by saying that it's important to share the Palestinian American story, because your story is not out there. In the media, we only hear the other side. It's really critical that we hear the Palestinian American story. And an op-ed is one way to get your story out there. And yes, it's important to build public sympathy. It's important to build public empathy to get the support of the public so that we can have policy change on this issue. The only reason we saw the kind of protests that we saw just now recently is because of social media. That's the power of storytelling through social media. Now the world is watching and listening, and they know what's actually happening. And we need to do more of that, right? If we mobilize thousands of people in Patterson, including Black Lives Matter, to engage in solidarity with the Palestinian American community, imagine if we get the story out there in the public, like to a greater extent, then what kind of support we can build, which will ultimately change policy, right? And so I encourage you to share your Palestinian American story. You can have multiple goals. There just doesn't just have to be one goal. There could be an inward focus goal, like you're talking about, Alia, with the community, and then there's the outward focus goal that focuses on other audiences, right? Like the public. And
can I say something, Afshin, so important about? I really want to say a comment, because this is what happens when I try to talk. I really want to say something about what you said about the mobilization of all those people going out into the streets. I was on a seminar, like I was also on a Zoom call with the Palestinian youth. They were like trying to organize for this protest. And when I was listening to them, I was shocked, because they are trying to, like, they were saying we're fed up with what's going on. Like some of them were from the West Bank, some of them were from the 48 territory, some of them like from over the world. And I was sad for them, because they were saying We don't want any leadership. We don't have any leadership now. And we are just going to do things our way. So they were actually there. That's a tragedy. That's actually, it's not going to help anything. That's going to cause more chaos, and that's going to cause more trauma. Like, people are going into the streets. It's not going to cause any type of change. Believe me, this is not going to help us, because it's actually, and we're saying, oh, we are all together, but that's not true. That's a lie. So we have to look at ourselves with the eyes of honesty, brutal honesty, and then things can change.
So I don't want to, this is a much larger topic, and it deserves a bigger forum and a conversation that could take like at least a couple of hours to talk about. I encourage you to articulate your thoughts in an op-ed and share it with the Palestinian American community. And address the concerns that you're raising. As you do that, I ask you to please share with me your op-ed. I'm happy to review it and give you input. I've shared my email address here. I will share a link to these slides with the beer, who will get it out to both of you as attendees of these workshops. And then the final step is that when you're ready to publish, make sure that you write a compelling pitch to the op-ed editor. So whoever the editor of the newspaper is, you can find their email address usually on the newspaper website. You want to look for the opinion editor, and you write a letter, a very short email saying what your op-ed is about. And I did this the very first time I wrote an op-ed, and this was my email that I wrote to them to convince them to publish my op-ed. You can read it once you have it to a beer, but basically, it should be very short, very to the point, and compelling about why your op-ed should get published. Once you've written about 3 or 4 and you have a relationship with the op-ed editor, you won't have to do this any longer, but for the first few times that you do it, you will have to make the case for why your op-ed should get published. And with that, I just encourage you to share your story, whether it is to internal audiences or external audiences. And I encourage you, Alia, to organize a forum to have at greater length the topic that you're raising, because it deserves much more consideration and discussion than we can have today at this forum, because we're already 4 minutes over time. I want to thank both of you for sharing your powerful ideas and stories, and I look forward to getting your op-eds, and I'm happy to provide input. You can bounce ideas off of me, and please share your stories with us. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Afshin. Thank you all.
Yeah,
once I get them, I'll send it to everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Alia, thank you for sharing.
Go ahead. My heart is just with you, with your heart. No, and I hope
we need 500 people like you in the West Bank. We need 3,000 in Gaza, because we need so much therapy and healing. I agree with you.
Yes, and I hope that you find, like, we need to find our peace in ourselves first to be able to move forward. And
Agreed.
I just, I mean, we're still like, I mean, when the things happens, like, we feel it in ourselves as if we're there, because that trauma is in our genes. Yeah. So once we realize that, we have what we call insight. Then we call, okay, I know this is happening now. So how can we heal this so that we can like move forward? We're not stuck in this reactionary way of dealing with things. So we re-traumatize ourselves. And it's just on and on and on and on and on. That's the issue.
Thanks.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And I'm sure your mother is so, I'm not gonna say, but I just salute Palestinian women, because they're one of the toughest, courageous women that I have ever met. Seriously. Yeah. And peace to her soul. And I'm sure she's happy in heaven.
Salam.
Yeah. Salam.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.